Hey everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. This video is going to be my Geekly Wrap-Up for the week of February 3rd through February 9th. This week I managed to read 3 books, I DNF'd 2 books, and I played 4 board games. So let's go ahead and do the books first. The first book that I finished was also the first book that I finished for the black-a-thon, which I've already made a video about, so if you want to know more about that, I'll make sure that it's linked either in a card or in the description. It's still not too late to participate if you want to. But I read Slay by Brittany Morris, which was amazing. I had so many people in comments on my black-a-thon TBR video saying that Slay was so good and they were so excited I'm reading it, and this book did not disappoint. So this book is about Kira, who is a high schooler living in Bellevue, Washington, which was wild because that's like 20 minutes away from where I live. Don't be creepy. And she has created, secretly, nobody knows she is the creator, this online virtual world where players duel based off of like these cards, and it's called Slay, and it is basically like an online haven for black gamers and geeks. Everything that is in the online world is based off of like black history and black culture and celebrating the diaspora and also like the international community of black folks and the unique like cultural features that each group has. And then her amazing online world gets infiltrated by someone who is trolling because something bad happens in real life that is connected to Slay the game. So Kira feels responsible for it. She feels like she needs to duel this person that's coming into the world and trolling and basically saying that the game is racist because only black people are playing it and therefore it must be exclusionary towards white people, which... Go do some Googling if you think that racism against white people is a thing. The like one sentence version of it is, it can't be racist if it's against a majority group. It can be prejudice at most, but yeah, go do some Googling if you're like, what? I don't understand. But I thought that this book was really excellent. I loved the character of Kira. I loved the arc that she went through where she had all of these feelings of like responsibility at the same time that she creates Slay because she's tired of being the one black person that everyone asks questions about black culture at school. She also like goes through this arc where she realizes that she doesn't have to be responsible as the creator of Slay for everything that happens in the game at the same time that she's trying to create a space that is welcoming and safe and open and fostering community. I adored this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Go read it if you haven't. I thought that the like discussion of video game and geek culture was also spot on. Geek culture very much still has a racism problem. Geek culture will very often have panels of people at conventions and they have like one queer person who's white on a panel of all white people and they call that diverse, and it's not. So I thought that this book was really a sort of breath of fresh air in a genre that has all too often been dominated by white people. I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed reading it. Then I DNF'd one of my most anticipated releases of the year, which was Scavenged the Stars by Tara Sim. This was the gender-swapped Count of Monte Cristo retelling book that came in the Owl Crate for January, and I really just did not get along well with this book. It took away all of the stuff that I love about the Count of Monte Cristo, all the drama and the setup and the scenes in the prison where like he's learning from the old priest how to sword fight, skips over all of that and just goes straight to the point where it's like, girl wants revenge, becomes rich countess to secure revenge, thinks maybe revenge bad because boy I like would have to die. And like that's the entire substance of the story. I think that I'm now officially over reading books that have like teen girl assassins as the protagonist because I've read all of the good ones and I'm just kind of tired of this trope now. I think it just needs to go away for a while and we need to not do this for a while. I also think that the world building was honestly kind of flat because the author was throwing around like a lot of place names and references to the world and then never sort of returned to those and built upon those. Like, that is one way to do your world building, is to just sort of throw it all out there and have the reader be kind of disoriented by this immersion. But then generally the payoff is supposed to be that we find out a little bit more in the writing later on in the book, the importance and significance of that early world building, and the reader gets to figure it out. And when that payoff isn't there, that's not cool world building, that's just not world building. So I decided I didn't care to finish this book. I also decided to DNF one of the books that I put on my TBR game for February, and that is The Toll by Neal Shusterman. This is the third book in the Scythe trilogy, which was one of the first books that I actually talked about on this BookTube channel when I started it a couple years ago. And I realized I just don't really care about this series anymore. Certainly not enough to read a 1,000-page conclusion to a trilogy that I enjoyed when I read the first two books, but I realized I just don't have any interest in continuing with. So I decided not to go on with that. Then I read another excellent 5-star read, which is Grease Bats by Archie Bongiovanni. This is by a non-binary creator, and it is about these two best friends, Scout and Andy, who are gay disasters. Andy is also non-binary, specifically gender fluid. Scout is a lesbian, and it's kind of like a slice of life comic, but it's a very queer slice of life comic. I loved all of the characters within this. It definitely feels very much like if you are in a queer friend group that is in their 20s, maybe early 30s or so, you very easily slot into one of these characters. So I'm obviously Gwen, who is the bisexual lady who's into the witchy aesthetic. And I really loved this book. I took my time reading it because, again, it's a slice of life comic, so reading a few of them at a time is just like eating delicious candy from my little queer heart. I love it. I'm so glad that I asked for this for the holidays, and I'm so glad that my cousin got it for me. Yeah, I would definitely recommend this if you're queer and if you want to get a good gift for the queer people in your life. This is probably it. All right. Last book that I finished this week was Color Me In by Natasha Diaz. This is a book that I picked up because I heard that it had a Jewish protagonist, and actually the protagonist is Black and Jewish, and that's not something I think I've seen ever in YA. I have one picture book on my shelves where a Black Jewish kid is the main protagonist. But I don't think I've ever encountered that in YA. And this is also an Own Voices story where the author herself is also multiracial. I think she's Afro-Brazilian, Lebanese, and Jewish. She said all of the things in the back of the book. So if you're more curious about how her biography influenced the story, you can go read that. But basically, this is a story of Nevaeh, who is a mixed-race girl whose parents are getting a divorce, and she really feels caught between the two of them, but also their two cultures, that she doesn't really feel like she belongs totally in either of them. So when she goes on her mom's side to that family's Baptist church in Harlem, and she is, the lightest skinned person in the room and is often mistaken for being white, and everyone sees her as the Jewish girl, she feels like she doesn't fit in there, but neither does she really practice Judaism because her dad has kind of rejected religiousness and stuff, and she really doesn't feel like she fits in with the sort of rich bougie white lawyer circles that he runs in. And so this sort of centers around her dad deciding during the divorce that he really wants Nevaeh to get a bat mitzvah, which is the coming of age ceremony that Jewish girls usually have around age 12, but Nevaeh is much older than the typical bat mitzvah girl, and she's at first really resistant to this because she doesn't necessarily feel like she has a strong connection to her Judaism, and she's kind of wondering why her dad, who's rejected religion all his life and now seems to be rejecting their family and her family's blackness, is now pushing this on her. So she doesn't really get it, and she's really angry. At the same time, there's also a lot of discussion of colorism and passing privilege within the Black community, which I don't, that's not my experience. So this was definitely a learning moment for me as I was reading about this, because I've only really read about that in like adult fiction and historical texts, YA not as much. And so Nevaeh is kind of clashing with her cousins who are black and, you know, darker skinned, and them, you know, chastising her for taking up some space in discussions where maybe she shouldn't be speaking up. At the same time, she's coming into her own as a writer of poetry and as a storyteller, and she is basically like trying to figure out who she is and what parts of her parents' like cultures and her ethnicity is she going to feel like she has a connection to. So there's a lot going on in this book. It also comes with trigger warnings for rape that's described on the page. It's in a flashback when she's reading about something that happened to her mom. I kind of wish I had known that that was going to be on the page going into this book, which is why I'm stating it here now, because I think you should know going in if there's going to be rape on the page. And then obviously there's also some trigger warnings for racism, colorism, mostly like anti-black racism, but there's also some anti-Semitism in this book from the other characters that Nevaeh has to deal with. I ended up giving this book 3 out of 5 stars, mainly because I think that there were some times where her character was underdrawn, and that might have been intentional on the author's part to show that like Nevaeh and her identity are still kind of a work in progress, but there were a few times when I was like, I want more of this character. I want more of her interrogating who she is in this space. And I felt like I didn't get all of that. It definitely felt like beyond Nevaeh feeling like her identity was a work in progress, there were some times when I felt like the drawing of her character was still a work in progress, if that makes sense. Which you can still show that the character is undergoing a major change in her life while still having her like fully fleshed out. So that was my main like critique of the book, was there were a few times where I was like, I want more characterization for this, and I felt like the book didn't deliver. But I think that otherwise this book tells a really important story, and one that I have definitely not encountered in YA before. I think, like I said, there's a lot of stories that are about colorism and such in adult literary fiction that I have read, and about like mixed identity and everything. But I haven't encountered that super much in YA, and it's also not super often that I encounter Jewish protagonists in YA, so that's pretty cool. And that wasn't like specifically for a black-a-thon challenge, but I definitely think that if you are doing like the contemporary challenges for black-a-thon, or if you're just looking to read a YA contemporary by a black author, that would be a really excellent choice. Okay, and then let's go to the board games. So this week, or this past week, I guess I should say, we got some really exciting mail, which is 2 new expansions to one of my very favorite games that I talk about on this channel all the time, and that is Root. We got the Clockwork expansion, which basically adds some automata players so that you can play at higher player counts, but you just run some of the factions as automata. And that also opens up the door for solo play. And then we also got the Underworld expansion, which adds 2 new player factions, the Corvid Conspiracy and the Underground Duchy. So the Conspiracy are crows, and they basically have an entire sort of spy thing that resolves around placing plot tokens in clearings in order to mess with other factions and allow them to just draw a bunch of cards, and basically like they score their points based off how well they're plotting. And then the Duchy, which has something to do with swaying ambassadors, but I haven't played as that faction yet, so I don't know exactly how it works yet. So Sean and I played a massive game. We wanted to do 4 factions, so we had 2 automata, the cats and the birds, and then he played as the crows and I played as the lizard cult. It was a long game. 2 automata with only 2 players to run it, and also learning new factions is maybe not the best idea, but we made it work. I ended up pulling out a win as well, which was exciting. There have been some balance changes to the game, and I've talked about this game before on my channel, so like you can go find the Geekly Wrap-Up where I talk about that, or I'll link it here somewhere. But there have been some balance changes to all of the factions that are already out in the game, which I think was really necessary playing the lizards, because when I was playing as the lizards, actually having card draw earlier in the game was super essential towards me actually being able to be competitive. So just comparing the one time that I played it with the old rules and now with the new faction, Matt, I think that it's like night and day, and I'm really glad because I like playing as this faction, but now I feel like the lizards are actually competitive and you actually stand a chance of having a more satisfying gameplay experience. All right, then we had a board game night at a friend's house that we met through some conventions, and now we're still hanging out outside of the conventions and playing board games together. So he actually made his own, I guess, kind of print and play version of Blood on the Clock Tower, which I have also talked about before because we played it at a convention again. But basically it's like a big party social deduction game similar to something like Mafia or Werewolf, except the roles are all different. Every player has a unique role, and there's actually like a large role that the storyteller plays in it as well, in terms of like spreading misinformation and actually making the game state harder and more challenging, and I think therefore more interesting. It was also really curious playing this at a lower player count, because I think we had 6 people, and then our 7th person, Andrew, he was the storyteller for all of the games because he was the one with the most experience running it. I think it actually makes the game harder when you're playing it at lower player counts, because you would think it would make it easier to find out who the evil team is, but I think it's actually a lot more difficult because the storyteller gets to choose harder characters to put in for the random selection. So I think Evil ended up winning for all 3 of the games we played, including the game where yours truly got to play as the imp, which is the character that like is the killer in the night, kind of. I was very proud of the fact that I bought into my lies so convincingly that I was actually convinced that my own false narrative of who the characters were was more true than who the characters actually were. Again, that probably only makes sense if you know what the game is, but I've talked about it before on this channel, so I will also have that linked somewhere. We also played a couple of other more basic party games, including the return of an old favorite, Sushi Go Party, which is basically a pick and pass game where you're given a hand of cards. You get to choose one card that you're going to keep, and then you pass the rest of the hand to the player next to you, and you are basically trying to pick cards that will give you the most points according to the little sushi menu that's spread out. So I love this game. It's infinitely replayable because you can change up the little menu, which means that you are changing point combinations and strategies and everything. I also love this game because it goes up to 8 players, so it's like one of the largest player count games while still, I think, offering a satisfying experience. I think sometimes when you get to larger player numbers or party games, it feels like the fun is diluted a little bit, and I never feel like that when I'm playing Sushi Go. So the difference between that and Party is just that the Party edition has like more cards and things like that. So if you're looking for a more satisfying experience, I'd recommend Sushi Go Party, but it also comes in like a smaller, more basic Sushi Go version. And then we played a new game that we've had for a little while, but we haven't played yet, and it's called Deadwood 1876. This is a strange game. It's a little bit deduction and a little bit just chaos. This is a game where you're all playing as different like Wild West gunslingers, and you are trying to get the most money, but also have the most firepower for the final showdown, which is something that will take place in the game location where the players have the most money. I think that this game went on a little bit long for what it was, especially with 7 players. They said that the game would take 40 minutes tops, and we were playing it for over an hour at that point, which I think was a bit long for this game, but I also enjoyed it. It does kind of suck if, like myself, you have really bad luck and you just roll really badly on all of your guns, because you kind of end up stuck in a place where you're not really able to be competitive for the end game. So in that respect, it was a little bit more luck dependent than I would have liked, but still, it was an enjoyable experience. And that is it for this week's Geekly Wrap-Up. If you've read any of these or played any of these games, leave a comment down below and let's get a conversation going. Alternatively, you can tell me about something that you enjoyed reading or playing or experiencing this week. If you like this channel and you'd like to see more of what I do, go ahead and subscribe, because that is the best way to get notified when I post new videos. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!